So while there's a need to address the demand side of trafficking via prosecution and greater awareness of trafficking issues, there's a need to tackle wider causes of trafficking, including poverty and discrimination.
Currently, what's happening in Singapore, first of all, I've been working on addressing sex trafficking or trafficking in person, particularly for women and children around the region in Singapore for a number of years. And, last year, for the first time, we see a positive step made by the government, by the state, which is finally acknowledging the issue of trafficking, the existence of trafficking here in Singapore. And then this year, they have just published the draft National Plan of Action, which was released in February. So these are all steps in the right direction, but it's not fast enough. Because Singapore actually the state itself has been talking about reviewing the trafficking legislation for several years. I can recall from as early as 2004 when we first started engaging Ministry of Home Affairs. The Minister of State, Associate Professor Ho Peng Kee, has actually stated publicly that yes, we are reviewing the trafficking legislation. So they have been reviewing it since 2004. This is already 2012. It's already 9 years, and they're still reviewing it. And currently, the state has said that it is studying the feasibility study of assessing of rectifying the UN Palermo Protocol on trafficking. So really, it's been 9 years. I think it's too long. It's because every month of delay, there's human life involved. There's human life impacted. The women who are trafficked, she is someone's wife, someone's daughter, someone's sister. So every month of delay, we're actually looking at how we are impacting this life. So I think it's really, the time is now. We really the state have to act now. The state has to, speed up its studying of the UN Palermo Protocol and sign now. I don't think they should be wasting any more time.
As you are aware, Singapore is a signatory to the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. Now, as a signatory, we are required, the government, when I say we, the government is required to submit a report on how far it has complied or how far it has failed to comply to the United Nations CEDAW Committee. Now, the role of the NGO is to watch the report that the government submitted and to submit its own shadow report. In 2011, the government had to do the oral representation, and this was in July last year in New York. Now, AWARE, as the leading advocacy group on women's issue, we submitted our our second shadow report. And in that shadow report, one of the issues that came out very, very clearly was the issue of trafficking in Singapore. And when the Singapore government, with its delegation, made its oral representation to the United Nations CEDAW committee, and these committee members consisted of experts from Bangladesh, Egypt, Turkey, Israel, etc., etc. A lot of the questions that were asked of the Singapore delegation was the issue of trafficking in Singapore. Now, one of the things that came out during this discussion on the trafficking is the fact that Singapore is not a signatory to the Palermo Protocol. The Palermo Protocol on trafficking is very important because the definition of trafficking under the Palermo Protocol is very wide. It includes the 4 Ps that everybody cites, these 4 Ps, which is prevention, punishment, protection, and partnership. Now, because Singapore is not a signatory to the Palermo Protocol, our definition of what is trafficking is not in line with the Palermo Protocol definition. Now, during the July 2011 oral representation that the Singapore government made to the committee in the United Nations, Madam Halimah Yacob, being the head of the delegation, promised that it will look into aligning the Singapore's definition of trafficking with that as stipulated in the Palermo Protocol. So that's one of the issues that came out. Why is Singapore not a signatory to the Palermo Protocol?
Singapore is going to ratify the protocol, the Palermo Protocol. I think it's an important document and I think it is a good move. But I think the state is also very aware that once it ratifies the Palermo Protocol, NGOs, all of us, will be keeping our eye on the ball through various processes, including CEDAW reporting process, the Universal Periodic Review, which is a human rights reporting process, as well as the annual report that will be put up by the US State Department, called usually the Trafficking in Persons Report. I think all of these will become crucial places for us to ensure that the government will stay true to the form of the Palermo Protocol. Right now it is a difficult period because while it is very good that the state intends to ratify the Palermo Protocol, of course there are many things that need to be done. For example, there must be legislation review. Certain laws have to be amended. We have to decide whether we are also going to have a standalone anti-trafficking law that is already there in Malaysia and Indonesia, or are we just going to amend a whole plethora of laws and use them to charge perpetrators, you know. So this is where I think a lot of discussions need to take place. Another area is the whole area of what we call victim assistance. How are we really helping the person to what we call have downtime, to reflect in the shelters, to be able to be rehabilitated, to be reintegrated into society. All these needs a lot of support in resources for the NGOs that are already doing a lot of good work. So this is another big area of commitment that I think the government of Singapore needs to look into very closely.
HealthCert was started 6 years ago with a group of doctors, and one of them, Professor Wong, from the NUS Public Health Department. And we wanted to reach out to the marginalized in our community. And we found Geylang. The clinic charges $5 for every consult. And if our patients can't afford, we don't charge them. We've got about 15 volunteer doctors working with us at the moment. One of the things we found in Geylang, to our horror really, is that the range of women who come here, the transient sex workers, those who come on a social visit pass. One of the cases I met was a young Indian girl. She's barely about 20, and I found out that she was actually a medical school dropout. You know, came here and just to do the sex trade. And she's not alone. There are many young women from even China, largely Chinese and Indians, but we've got the occasional Eastern European. There are also Filipinos and Thais who are here. Some of the cases we see, apart from migrant workers, are the commercial sex workers in Geylang. Many of them are transient sex workers, and they are the ones who usually do not want to see a doctor because of being afraid. They are afraid of being found out. But for those that we see, a few of them have got STDs. We do the battery of tests for them, but we charge them regular laboratory rates, and the problem with many of them is that they don't want to know the results. At the same time, they want to know the results, and it's been a real challenge for us. Education is also being done here. We do public health education with them. We teach them safe sex. We teach them about HIV and all its attendant, related aspects of the disease. One of the first few cases I saw, I remember, was a young Chinese sex worker. She came in and she had this terrified look on her face, and I found out she was barely 18, and she just serviced her first customer, and she was just terrified of contracting STD, and I had to do some very simple tests just to reassure her. You may have heard of the forest brothels in Jurong. Now Jurong has about 300,000 or more foreign workers, both of different nationalities. And we found a few years ago that there was a tented area within a forest where girls from India, from China, even from Philippines and Thailand were found in this little forested area. They were servicing the men who went there after work, and they were in tents. Yeah.
Thai lady, and her name is Thong Sup. And Tong Su brought me even to the place where she was providing sexual services, and this time it was at Woodlands. She showed me the place where the sex workers would be there to provide services, and foreign workers around the Woodlands area would queue for the service, and for each service they have to pay like $20 to $25 per session, which is the session just sexual intercourse, and that's about it. It's a very rough kind of clearing in some forested area, and the tents are not proper tents. It's just a piece of cloth or canvas over the branches of the tree, just to make sure when it rains it doesn't stop the business, I guess. And then you can see tissue paper around and stuff like that. It's really something that you never expect it to be a place for providing sex services.
And in the case of the forest brothels that we have read about in the papers, right, one just has to imagine, would any woman in her right mind, would she have said yes if she had known how this scenario would have played out? It's so clear that she was duped. She must have been told that you're coming into the, perhaps even she may have been told you're coming into the sex trade, but never would she have imagined that she would have to give services to a whole line of men who are queuing up on the forest floor, right? And everyone wants, it's very fast, and she earns very little money. That is a whole action of dehumanizing the person. For her, as well as this queue of workers who will now just think that this is all that sex is, this is all that perhaps a woman's role can be, I think it affects both parties, because your mindset can change as to how you look at a woman and the whole concept of even sexuality.
So for the women, mainly domestic workers, but gradually over the years, I also saw sex workers coming to us for assistance. Some of these workers were referred to us by the ICA, the immigration authorities, and also by the police. We have seen over the years those who are sexually exploited. They are women, some of them young women, like below 18, from Vietnam, Thailand, Sri Lanka, India, and also from the Philippines and Indonesia.
It's been very encouraging to be a part of the civil society consultation process of the Interagency Task Force on Trafficking in Persons. This task force was set up last year, and the purpose of the task force is to come up with a national plan of action on trafficking in Singapore. It's a joint initiative. It brings together members from MOM and MHA, and they recently participated in a civil society consultation process where different members of NGOs, academics, and other organizations were able to come together and share their inputs into the National Action Plan.
Singapore signed the convention and ratified in 1995. Again, that's been so long ago, and each time the CEDAW committee has actually asked the state on its position on trafficking. Again, nothing has happened. So I feel that this is everyone's issue. Every single one has the right to actually tell the state, hey, we need to step up. If we are going to be, part of this global community, if we are a first world country, we are always saying that, hey, we are first world. Before we admit and say that, hey, I'm a first world country, we have this fantastic airport, we have this fantastic port, we have skyscrapers. If you look, all this, if you just walk around Singapore, you can see the signs of our first world. In order, I feel that before we can claim to be a first world country, we really need to have first world law for everyone, not just for Singapore citizens. For everyone who works here, they deserve to be protected under a first world law, and it's everyone's issue.
And therefore, the committee urged the Singapore government to become a signatory. Secondly, with regards to the definition of trafficking, as I mentioned, there is a problem. The Singapore's government's definition of trafficking is not in line with the international definition. Where is the difference? The problem is this. In Singapore, they do not recognize forced labor as a form of trafficking. I'll give you an example. Say a Filipino lady agreed to come to Singapore to work as a singer, a legitimate, valid, totally legitimate work as a karaoke singer in a karaoke lounge. So she made the application, she came in here, the papers are all in order. And then what happened when she comes here? The employers remove her passport from her, and then instead of becoming a legitimate karaoke singer, she was forced into prostitution. Now, according to the Singapore's government of trafficking, this is not a victim of trafficking because they don't recognize forced labor as a form of trafficking. So therein lies the problem with our very limited definition of trafficking. Now, the other problem is this, in Singapore, victims of trafficking are not recognized as such, because if they are caught, for example, my Filipino singer again, if for some reason a raid is done in the karaoke lounge and then she was discovered, she will not be recognized as a victim of trafficking. She will be seen as an immigration offender. So there's another problem here. Instead of seeing her as a victim, they see her as an offender, as an immigration offender because she has overstayed, or etc., etc. And what do? They deport her. And this is really bad, because if you deport her, then potential victims, other victims of trafficking, when they realize that it's no point reporting, because by reporting they're going to be sent back to their home country, and they don't want. They want to be here earning a legitimate, a valid living. So that's the other problem. So Singapore was urged by the UN committee to review this process. Look at the victims of trafficking properly as victims instead of as an immigration offender. The other problem is with this Filipino lady that I keep citing is this. If she is deported back, then how on earth are we going to find out who the real culprits of this trafficking scam or scheme, yeah? Because you cannot investigate, you cannot prosecute, then you don't have substantiated cases of trafficking. So if you don't have it, that's why our Singapore government keeps going to the international scene and say, no, we don't have a trafficking problem.
And another area that needs more attention is the public education. We need to put this whole discussion more and more into the public domain in a way that reduces both the judgment and the stigmatization. Many feel that if a woman is caught in the sex trade, she must be quite out of her mind to have said yes. But coercion, being duped into this trade is very prevalent, and it takes place in many forms in our society. I may be just working in a karaoke lounge, and I'm told that I must really chalk up the drinks to $300 by whatever means per day. That's a lot of money I have to rake in, otherwise my pay is docked, and I'm thinking about my family back home. So they tell you do whatever it takes, and she is driven to such a position because of her debts, because of her family back home, etc. So we need to look at the circumstances and be more empathetic to this situation. More importantly, we have to ask ourselves, what is the value system we embrace as a society if in our midst today we have so many women taking on these kind of roles in our society, and where does the demand come from? The demand comes from within our society. We cannot just say it's all foreign workers. When we walk around, we also see a lot of Singaporeans involved in having sex with paid sex, Singaporeans who are running the business of paid sex. So we as a society are involved in this. We have to look at our own structure, we have to look at our own value system and our own process of education, where we are being sensitized to this whole discussion, and to what extent are we having honest discussions on our value system.
We will say men and women could be victims of trafficking as well, and it is not just about sex trafficking. Of course, sex trafficking is something of greater concern because of the sexual violence, which is a horrendous crime against any woman or child.
We need to completely embrace and understand that trafficking is not a border issue, it's a borderless issue. If the problem is trans-border and it can go anywhere, then the solution has to be trans-border. While we improve our national structures, we also need to look at how we find collaboration with other countries through G to G, government to government, through NGO to NGO, through private sector, because some of them, it's the private sector that is running businesses in other countries. And I think this is another area that we really need to look at. And the last area that I feel we tend to just couch it all and say everyone needs training. I think for the trauma that a person who has been trafficked, that person goes through, we need specialist training. It's a trauma counseling training, which is different from other forms of training. We need to invest in this kind of training. We need to do training horizontally across ministries, across NGOs, and we also have to do vertically. And people change jobs, people move into another role. So this kind of training has to happen continuously till maybe 5 years' time, Singapore can really get to grips with the whole issue of trafficking. Why do we need to do so much? Simply because the stories of women and girls and boys and even some men who have been caught and who have been rescued from being in the sex trade, I think we have destroyed many, many lives through this process. It is very hard to restore a person's self-esteem if in a month a person has already slept with easily 100 persons. and being paid pittance, especially if she started off being very unwilling to be in this business. I think the investment that we have to put in to restore the self-confidence is huge, and we owe her that much, at least to give her a little bit of light in her life to look into the future after so much has been destroyed. And these stories are captured so many times in books, in videos, etc. But what is happening is many of us are glossing over it already. It is uncomfortable. We know the story, but we do not want to engage on the feeling, on what the person has gone through. We need to, because that's the only way that we as a society are saying that that person's suffering has to stop. We have to do much more to help her and prevent others like that being caught in such situations.
And because it was raised quite substantially in New York last year, so in 4 years' time, when Singapore report again to the CEDAW committee at United Nations, we hope that there will be more improvements that the government has done with regards to the issue of trafficking in Singapore.
Our screaming voice is not heard. Our plead for freedom is denied. Our dignity is ripped off. In our land, injustice prevails. Free us from the chains of exploitation. Free us from the forest brothel. For we are the victims of human trafficking.